80s, but there were odd pockets of resistance. And one of the most odd was from a company called Electronic Dream Plant from Oxford in England, which came up with the incredibly silly idea of making an ultra-cheap, almost throwaway monophonic synth, and it was called the Wasp.
You could get great sounds out of them if you connected them to a speaker or an external amplifier, but because they had a built-in speaker, they always sounded terrible, and the name Wasp actually came from the rather thin droning sound you got out of the internal speaker. It was actually quite good for sort of solo type sounds, although, you know, on a traditional synthesizer you'd have a mod wheel here. People soon worked out that they had to go over here to bring the vibrato in and stuff. And the glide was actually quite good as well.
The Japanese, with names like Roland and Korg and Yamaha, dominated the market in the 1980s. But the Americans weren't quite out yet. Moog had one final fling in the heftily unreliable Memory Moog.
Very strong, very deep, a lot of filters, very are surrounded by the sound. It's a real instrument, so you are very it's very expressive, and you can give a lot of different states of mind. It's like a breath. It's like a heart.
I've got a mini Moog as well, but this is just like having 6 mini Moogs. So the 18 oscillators all stacked, so it's pretty powerful. It's a sort of kick your head in machine for bass, it really is. You know, you can't get control of it most of the time, but that's pretty good.
The 80s was a period of great change, with new technologies coming in like sampling, digital synthesis, and direct computer control. One system that encompassed many new concepts came from Germany, from PPG.
Classic PPG sound, I think people would recognise first off, would be the wavetable sweep. The instrument is structured in such a way that you have selection of waveforms by these controls here. This is the waves oscillator control, and this is your wave sub, which is like a second oscillator, which you can detune in the standard way against the other, against the original oscillator. But you can also select one out of the 64 waveforms for that particular voice. So here we go. What we're hearing now is not sample and hold. We're actually hearing waveform changes, waveforms being selected from the wave table. Now that's not terribly dramatic or useful in that particular mode, but some of the transitions are a lot smoother and can produce some very bell-like sounds. Once you add the wave term on, you've got an audio input, all essential for mic or line level sampling. But also you can create your own waveforms using sine waves or more complex waves as fundamentals first, second, third harmonics right through to 32nd harmonic. It's doing a heck of a lot for a 6809 based machine. It's producing 8 voices, and it's also a multi-timbral instrument. If you work in the 2.3 mode, you could call up 8 separate banks and go for split points or maybe layered sounds. So you could have a nice brass and vocal sound to the left, and maybe Hammond and Synthi to the right, and control the individual volumes of those sounds. The nice thing about it is, though it's 8 voice, it's quite intelligent in reassigning sounds to voices, so it's got a decent note robbing facility.
I first came across this beast probably 82, I think, and they were showing the prototype of this, but they had absolutely no sounds for it whatsoever. They shipped one over to me from Halstead. The British distributor was just up the road from here in Halstead, and I sat for a couple of weeks in my room and just did presets for it, which then got sent back to Italy and was shipped as the factory presets. Probably the most famous album that this was ever used on is Rendezvous by Jean-Michel Jarre, and he actually used quite a lot of those factory presets. The one I've got up here at the moment, famous laser harp sequence, which I think everybody's guessed by now is actually rolling on tape while he's holding his hands in the beams, simply because the laser harp could never be relied on to trigger properly. There's lots of other sounds on here that anyone familiar with that album will probably know. One of the wonderful things about the Synthex was it's probably the only polysynth in this room that's got band pass and high pass filtering. All the mono synths are bound to have it. But for some reason, most designers, whether it was Sequential Circuits or Moog, decided when they made a polysynth, they thought, oh, low pass filtering will be enough. You can't get a sound like that unless you have a band pass filter. Jeff Downes used to use one as a substitute for his Prophet 10 and 5 when they died, because it's very similar to program to a Prophet. It has this capability to do the Prophet type sounds, but a lot more. It also had chorus on board, which at the time was regarded as completely unprofessional, because you were supposed to use external chorus units. It meant that you got a much fuller sound. The other thing that was really nice about it was how quick and easy the sequencer was to come up with something. What I'm actually doing here, when I play the note, this button I'm tapping here represents spaces in between, so it was quite easily to play the musical rest that you wanted. Let's just try and find the right sound. Just something simple like that would have taken about an hour to get out of a PPG and Waveterm. So it was, although it was never going to be a sequencer in the way sequencers are now, it was great for throwing together ideas quickly for composition. Somebody else that took to using this a lot, although I don't think he ever actually recorded with it, was Keith Emerson. And one of the reasons he used it was that his GX1 was dying, and this was the only thing that could substitute for fanfare. And also using the sequencer, he could actually get the bass line running as well.
Well, there we have it, the golden age of analog synthesis. What Bob Moog tapped into in the early 60s may only have lasted until the mid-80s. But the spirit of analog synthesis is still being explored and appreciated by musicians. So it's been a wonderful day. Thank
Incredible.
you. Yeah, Well, I think there's a few instruments still working in there. Too many people crashing them. What's the future hold for the museum then?
Well, I think now I just want as many musicians to actually use these facilities as possible.
Mm-hmm.
It's set up for recording, not just for the enthusiasts to come down and revel in the wonder that's down there. So I hope that both the recording musician and the enthusiast will come in their hundreds.
Right. So you'd like to establish this as a studio that musicians can know is on the map for...
Oh, definitely, because there's lots of
sound.
instruments down there that aren't going to be easy to get hold of anywhere else, and they're all under one roof.
Yeah.
So I think that in itself will give a certain amount of popularity to this place.
Right. And perhaps a few more performances in years to come?
I think so. On the anniversary of this event, I think it would be a good idea to hold such gatherings after seeing the amount of people that turned up this time and the joy they had. I think it'd be well worth it.
Good. Well, it's been a great day, so maybe I'll just ask you for one more sneak look, I think.
Definitely.
Okay.
Come on in.